Well, all right. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining me, Nick, Christian. It's great to see you guys.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Let's see. I could use a little more volume. Cool. Well, for everyone who's joining us today, Nick is the owner of Green Farm Spirits. He's one of our awesome retail partners. Recently, we did last year's Knob Creek. So if you guys got in on Course Marshall you know how quick and smooth that was, which was awesome. And I'm joined by Christian Huber of Starlight Distillery today, which is great. That means, of course, that we are selecting a Starlight barrel. So I have a couple of samples in front of me. But thanks for joining me today, guys. It's great to see you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So this is our first brush with Starlight in the terms of a private selection. So Christian, if you wouldn't mind taking a minute, go ahead and give me the lowdown on Starlight and what you do and what you guys are up to, and then we'll get to a little bit of tasting.
Yeah, well, again, thanks for having me on. It's an honor to meet people like you in the bourbon world, and of course, Nick having us as a great ambassador and really pioneering our barrel portfolio and our family. So Starlight is actually a really old story. We haven't just been in the craft industry for a little bit. We were actually founded back in 1843. So my great grandpa established the property, like I said, in 1843. He came from a family winery and distillery in Baden-Baden, Germany. So he actually had brandy in its roots. He had winemaking in roots. Decided that he was going to take his shot at the New World. And then he actually moved to Louisville, Kentucky in the late 1830s, and then bought the property where our rick houses are at in the 1840s, then sold that property and bought the winery where it sits at today in 1843. He established the vineyards under Riesling, Spätburgunder, Blauburgunder, those typical German varietals. And then, unfortunately to him, as those who know wine, there's an American root louse called phylloxera here, killed everything off. And so he had to fall back onto his basically secondary, which was distilling. So him and his son Ignatius basically planted this property under peaches, under apples, under different Labrusca grapes like Concord, Niagara, Catawba, and then straight into, a lot more of the brambles, blackberries, black raspberries, and just was cranking brandy at the time. Back in 1843 into the late 1880s was a lot more brandy grown on this side of the river and distilled on this side of the river than bourbon ever was. So him and his son really got the foundation of what Huber's and Starlight Distillery would be. It would be a few more generations down. It went to Charles next as a third generation. He had to, like I said, experience World War I, the Great Depression, and Prohibition here on the property. We think we have it very hard with COVID and the pandemic, but he survived and kept maintaining the property. And again, he distilled brandy. We were one of the very rare few wineries in the area that was allowed to keep making wine for the, of all things, the church. Sacrificial purposes, and then alcohol for medical use only. I know everyone has those bottles that say for medical purpose only, same way. But whiskey really didn't come into the property until Carl. You see his name on a lot of our bottles, Carl T. He was my great-grandfather. He established the property under more of the grain farming. So he brought in corn, he brought in wheat. At that time, rye was actually grown quite a bit in the Ohio River Valley as well. So he started, naturally going towards whiskey. He saw how popular it was across the river. You saw the rise of Stitzel Weller. You saw the rise of Buffalo Trace, Old Forester, and what Brown Forman was doing. He wanted to know that action. But he wanted to do it on his own unique way. Unfortunately to him, he died very early on in his life due to alcoholism, which led my grandpa, who was the oldest son of the following generation, to just swear off hard alcohol. He didn't want to do anything about it. And that's kind of a weird portion of our history, just because my grandpa just did not distill. He didn't want to carry on the family tradition. He saw his dad die from it, and then he actually had to leave high school and join the family and take it over. So that's kind of that weird period. And that's when our winery became much larger than our distillery. He focused on our winemaking. He actually grew it to the Indiana's largest estate-grown vineyard, Indiana's largest vinifera vineyard. And that's where it still stands today. My grandpa was really pushing that. My dad is the one who got us back into distillation. So my great-grandmother, Marcella, talked my dad into it about in 1995, saying, you have to keep the family tradition going with brandy. So Grandma Marcella, back in, like I said, when I was born and then into early 2000s, she was like, bring back Applejack, bring back, these great brandies that the family has always been. It, you know, she saw her husband go down and my grandpa, but he kept saying or she kept saying, you need to do this. Just because one bad generation happened doesn't mean it's going to happen again. So she ended up talking my dad into it, even though my grandpa wasn't very happy. And then my dad started what would be Starlight Distillery. Again, we called it Starlight Distillery because it was the entire town that was helping us out. We're Indiana's, again, largest winery, and when it comes to actually growing grapes, we focus under everything farm to bottle. But we've also been a sustainable farm since 1843. We've never been quote unquote organic. My actual grandpa about bankrupted us twice trying to go organic, but he said we were going to be the closest thing to sustainable farming as we could. Nowadays, we boast, the largest bluebird and swallow hatchery in the state of Indiana as our natural insecticide. We grow non-GMO grains for our whiskeys, including Bloody Butcher, Hoppy Blue, which sometimes get a bad rap in the marketplace, but we clean it up very, very much. But the sustainability portion of our property, I'm really proud about. Every aspect of it is reused. And that's kind of led into my dad, doing the brandy. We had so much excess wine that wasn't suitable. Those are the leftover lees. Those were, grape skins to make grappa. We had all this alcohol there, but we were letting it go to waste or going back into compost. So we bought the 80-gallon Christian Carl still in 2001 and started producing brandies. By 2005, my dad built a name up for himself, got on the board of ADI, American Distilling Institute, where he met my mentor for a long time, which was Dave Pickerel, Dave Perkins, Lisa Wicker, Penn Jensen. Owen Powell was the guy who put it on. But when it came to it, they used to have the original ADI meetings actually at our facility. So as a kid, I was really growing up around those distillers. We held the competitions here. And as a kid, 13, 14 years old, I was tasting, figuring out what I liked back in that time. Funny enough, and this is honest to God, true story, my dad tells it, the day I turned 13 years old was the first day I started distilling by myself, making Applejack.
Cool.
Funny enough, like I said, going back into it, I really was passionate about distilling itself. I actually remember the first real conversation I got in with Pickerel and Perkins. They were fighting about who made the best finished whiskey. It was Hill Rock Oloroso versus port barrel finished rye coming out of High West, now known as Midwinter's Night Dram. I remember those two going bantering back and forth, but Dave comes into our story a lot. So starting about 05, 06, 07, when those competitions were being held here, we actually started putting whiskey back. So we couldn't sell it. Indiana was not allowed to distill grains until 2013, but we were allowed to experiment with early mash bills. So back in that day, Dave and Dad and Lisa and all these guys were just coming in, having fun. We tried these weird wild mash bills. We had wheated, we had high rye, some that were high corn. We tried everything, just see what happens. So now jumping to like 2010, 2011, Indiana looked like they were going to allow distillation back in the state. Mostly because NGP was the second largest distillery doing bourbon. And they're like, all right, maybe we need to let some craft guys, bring up the tourism side of things when it comes to distilling, grain-based spirits rather than just brandy. So my dad helped pioneer that with NGPI to really, get Indiana back on a map for distilling, especially for rye whiskey, which we finally got this year trademarked. So it's Tennessee whiskey, Kentucky bourbon, and then Indiana finally has Indiana rye.
Cool.
So historically brought to you by NGP 95.5. But when it comes down to it, we finally got that law passed. So my dad started, laying out what the new Starlight Distillery would be for the grain base. But people don't realize we were set up to be another smooth amber. We were set up to go at OKI with a 10-year-old NGP product. That's how we were initially going to do it. And this is the shocking thing for everyone who's listening. Dad and we were going to go full-fledged into just buying whiskey, being an independent bottler. But Dad and Dave had a conversation, and Dave said, do not source whiskey. And for you, both you two, Dave sourced everything. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
look at Blacken, look at Whistle Pig, look what he did. And then he's telling us, don't source whiskey. And we're like, why? Why don't, like, you've done it over and over and over again. It works. But he said, you guys will lose it. And I didn't understand it back then because I was tasting 2 and 3 year whiskey from us. I'm like, we should have went 8, 10, 12-year-old NGP. But I finally understood what he meant. Once you get on that stuff, you can't get off. It's hard to go to your own distillate. I'm not going to throw any names out of the bus, but there's many distilleries who are going through that at the moment. And I didn't understand it. It's like in the lack of better terms, how I kind of describe it's like a drug. You have beautiful whiskey, beautiful barrels, but once you go onto your own stuff, it's different style. I mean, NGP has that column. They have their own yeast. They have their own touch to their whiskey. And then when you go to yours, it's that initial shock. So Starlight, from the very beginning, we were own distillate. And like I said, we suffered through a lot of 2, 3 year whiskey that, we are proud of at the time. Looking back, God, I wish I would have kept those barrels and not made our name on 2 and 3 year whiskey. We needed that money.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with it. It's just we needed it to keep putting barrels back. And it took us forever to get to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 year whiskey now. But it was a challenge. I mean, no offense to anybody who puts out 2 year whiskey, but there's hard to find great 2 year whiskey. And for us, it was a struggle. But I'm happy we kept our own distillate, because if we weren't, I don't know if we would actually came out with mash bills. But like I said, we went back there to the original 2005, 2006, 2007 barrels, and we picked out 2 mash bills we really liked. One of which was a 4-grain. It was 51% corn, 20% rye, 20% malt and barley, 9% wheat. And then a 3-grain, which was 60% corn, 20% rye, all the way up to 30% rye, and 20% malted barley, down to 10% malted barley. Kind of depends on the harvest here, because sometimes rye just for us kind of fluctuates. The same with malted barley. But nevertheless, when we were asking like what kind of mash bills we wanted when we grew older, I remember my dad still rubs this in the face. Dave asked me, what kind of whiskey you want to make when you get older? And no shot of Maker's Mark, but I said anything but Maker's Mark. I mean, to him, of all people. But I just wanted to do high rye, and that's where that like higher 3-grain came into play. As well as, so when the still house was opening, we finally hired on Lisa Wicker. We got her off Limestone Branch. She's now the master distiller at Widow Jane. She believed in the concept. Fantastic mind, been around the whiskey industry forever, knew blending, knew how to taste, and really, helped us tweak those mash bills in a little bit. From there, like I said, from the beginning, we were 100% sweet mash, and that comes from the more wine side of us. I mean, we're fermentation science. Me and Blake, I see him. He might walk in here in a second and say hello. My younger brother, but we're both viticulture and enology majors. So V&E, Blake went to Cornell University, and I went to the wine knowledge we have. We can manipulate Saccharomyces cerevisiae and Delbrueckii to do ester fermentations that we want inside these basically our fermenters. So depending on how long we want to ferment, the temperature we want to ferment, we can, being a wine guy, we knew how to manipulate that. So the very early on, we were doing that manipulation to form the esters and kind of compounds we wanted to find in the whiskey. And this is where Starlight gets, lack better, complicated. We have a 500-gallon Vendome that was custom built for us with Dad and Vendome. 500-gallon, huge onion, huge swan neck with a 2% downgrade lyre arm, with a 5-plate rectifier off the right of it, with a heavy deflator running reflux back to the pot and a condensing column. So why it gets complicated, every single cut is done by hand. There's no SOP, standard operating procedure, to figure a thing out. It's the distiller making the choice every single day. So how my dad cuts it, being an Old Forester fan, is different than what I like, which was 36% NGP bourbon or 95.5. Some of those original smooth ambers and some of those Willet ryes that back in the day, they were $175 for a 12-year, and I wish I bought cases of it before $700. But same thing with smooth ambers. But nevertheless, my brother, he's a Four Roses. So we're looking at the oils that come across the still. For instance, kind of my philosophy, I'll take that initial rye oil. First off, I do a huge head cut. I take those initial rye oils coming across. When I start getting a little huskiness, I actually run the reflux back to the pot, trying to save and trying to find out those oils a little bit. So I get a little bit more lighter, less of the density of the corn husk coming out of that 3 grain. Really, really clean distillate. And then I cut as high as 120, 130. I'm done with it. And distillers look at me like, why? But I'm taking such a narrow heart cut just because I want those lighter, higher rye oils coming across. And like I said, Blake takes a different cut. My dad takes a lower cut. And then once we have the base distillate of the new make, if it's 4 grain or 3 grain, and however we cut it, goes into a tank, and then we proof it based on the proof every single day from 104 all the way up to 125. So we'll taste at 105, 110, 115, 120, 125. And then let's say we like 115 the best, then we'll go 116, 117, 118, 119, 120 to figure out where we like it the best. And then again, another portion of it, we have 7 different cooperages. Okay. Out of everything I can talk about here, I did my senior thesis in oak. Same with my brother. Oak plays a huge portfolio role for us. 7 different coopers that have 7 very different roles, and I can talk for hours about oak. But to save you the pity of listening to me talk, if it has a little bit more corn oil, has a little bit more viscosity, a little bit more, we go char 3 to 4, either Kelvin, ISC, or Zach. Zach Cooperage being Old Heaven Hills Old Cooper, ISC, which is historically famous and everyone knows Kelvin. So those 3 are kind of our bigger, bolder for our higher corn mash bills and a little bit more oil. And then we have a floral and sweet kind of portfolio, and those mostly go into Canton and Seguin Monroe. Canton and Seguin Monroe are actually parent companies in France, one of which is Terroir, and then Seguin Monroe. Historically, they make wine barrels and cognac and Armagnac barrels. So very tight wood, and I can go into, we do long toasting to pull the vanillin, get a lot of lignin in there, and then those hemylyl cellulose when it comes to frou-frou, getting those salted butterscotch toffee aromatics into our whiskey. We really shoot for a dessert bourbon, and nowadays, like I said, nothing's under 4 years old. Everything's over 4, thank God. But we focus under those, unique small batches. We blend like a scotch. And we're proud of that. We rather, take some of lot B, lot C to make Carlty than row, 15 going all into it to make it. I mean, it's just winemaking philosophy there.
Sure. No, that's great. I mean, that was hugely insightful. It's kind of funny too. You mentioned some of those 2-year barrels, because it actually, Nick had to convince me a little bit. He was like, hey, you should do a Starlight. And I was like, you know what, man, like I had a 2-year Starlight probably like 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's a good idea. And he's like, no, I promise. Like, I just had some, it's coming out really good. And I was like, okay. And he's like, I promise. So, I'm glad we're back here talking, because I have a 4.5 year and a 5 year in front of me. Mm-hmm. And I was going to ask you, I have to commend you. I had a bunch of questions teed up, and you managed to just check them off. I was like, what's your barrel proof? And, why did you pick ISC for these specific? Because I think all 3 of these are ISC. I have an ISC char 2, ISC char 3, and a char 4, and both of the 4 grain, which is interesting.
Yeah, and ISC is a great portfolio, and it kind of gives you a good spectrum. Like I said, if it stops raining, I'll run us out there so you can actually see the barrels. But when it came down to it, the samples that you got are, very uniquely different. I think the reason I got you 3 originally from Nick was that I was going to show you a spectrum of how, a single cooperage, different chars, same distillate going in, can be so immaculately different. And that's kind of what we want. Behind me, too, this is my brother kind of jumping in.
How are you guys doing?
He just finished up. So we were running 4 grain back on the still. He just finished up the cook. So he wanted to join us and just say hello.
Yeah.
Very cool. Welcome.
So we're talking about the C lot from 16, that ISC lot that we did, a 4 grain. So.
Okay, yeah.
So it was
just tasting there today.
Well, they have 3 single barrels in the back that we're tasting right now.
Oh, okay.
So, but as a whole thing, when it comes to those ISCs, the char 2 should have a little bit more of the floral, fruity. Char 3 going into more of the frou-frou, a little bit more caramel, butterscotch, and char 4 should be pretty smoky and dense. But again, going back to it, so we put our lighter distillates in 1 and 2 and our heavier corn in 3 and 4. So I don't know if you've already tasted them before, but the char 4 should be pretty viscous comparatively to the 2 and 3. So.
And then Cooperage wise, you talk about some of you're tasting ISC now?
Yeah, we're all three were ISC.
All three are ISC. Yeah, ISC for our range of cooperages it falls right in between, and it tends to kind of go either direction, really just depending upon their production cycle to when the barrels are actually coming here and actually getting made. Just because even we find some of these ISCs, even sometimes these char twos that turn out to be these dense, lush, rich, and more of these caramelized sugars, and some of these char fours that tend to be a little bit more lighter and fruity. So we always say ISC kind of fits right in the middle of our kind of portfolio, and there's a lot of variability, which is a good and bad thing, because Kelvin and Canton are kind of two opposite ends of the spectrum. Kelvin being that more rich, smoky, caramelized sugars, Canton expressing the fruitiness, the soft vanilla, and more that lactone, those natural wood compounds that you find. Those two are pretty consistently as far apart from each other as possible. And then ISC, like I mentioned, is right there in between, to where they can be a little bit more like Canton sometimes, a little bit more like Kelvin sometimes, which is really fun just when we're tasting through these different barrels, because you find so many different kind of qualities within them and surprising things that happen after the aging process, for sure.
Yeah, well, if you're getting started to do your tasting, definitely crack that char 2
Okay.
the hat.
I have all three in front of me right now. Do a little keyboard organization, but yeah, I will admit I tasted through these a little bit ahead of time just to see what I was into. Yeah, so I have the 2, the 3, and the 4, and oddly enough, the char 2 is the oldest. I think. Well, I have 2 5s. I don't know. You probably know specifically the age, but a 4.5 and a 5, which is nice.
Yeah, the 4.5 that I got you doesn't birthday, I don't believe, until May. The other 2 are actually back in. One's a C lot, so it birthdayed actually 2 weeks ago. And then the third one was back as a B lot, which was February. So very different spectrums and different distilling runs. So they're all going to be different from each other. I know you already looked through them, but different distilling runs, at that point, the variability on them, especially running, February, March, April, it could be anything between different yeast, a little bit of the distiller influence on them. And I'll have to run the barrels on it a little bit.
Yeah, and just simple things like it getting warmer outside and the temperature actually to where it heats up, the pot heats up faster during the summer. It's a little bit warmer inside the building. That influences how fast the still comes over, kind of those pressure changes this time of year. So these little things that you would never think of actually influence the end distillate and how the particular run is going to go, just because depending on how well you can fine tune. So when we're doing a finishing run, we run a little rectifying column before we go to the condenser in order to basically, it's almost inside the rectifying column are plates, and each one of those plates is essentially another distillation, to where the vapor is going to be condensed back down to a liquid and then have to re-vaporize up through each one of those plates, to where you're kind of purifying that alcohol in the end, and you're really refining those characteristics and those flavors, because at each point during the run is chemical compounds that you find through all fermentations, and the grains and everything boil at different points. So you're going to have, if you ever come up and visit, you'll have to just see during a distillation run the dramatic changes you find, to where you get some more of these fruity compounds right at the beginning, and then as you go down towards the end, you'll hit a little of this more kind of oil. I call them fusel alcohols or fusel oils, so this thicker, and that's things that we want to keep away from that. But all through that range between that really high end, a lot of those sulfurous compounds and some of those fruity compounds that come over first, and those fusel alcohols are a whole array of things that make the spice, that give the spice of rye, that give the sweetness of the corn, and some of that more husky characters. There's a lot of other things that happen in between there, and you'll see different things come over at different times. And it's always interesting, as Christian mentioned, I heard him as I walked in, about the different distillation cuts, and we're always making the best distillate from each and every day, because our mashes are going to change, fermentation kinetics will change, and you'll never have the same inputs each and every time, because even though the grain might be very similar, the cook could have gone a little bit different, the fermentation could have gone a little bit different. So you really have to keep an eye on what end quality are you doing, and then we're reverse engineering. So we know what barrel cooperage we have in at the time. we know what distillate should go in that particular cooperage, and we're refining our kind of aspects non-biasedly. What is the best distillate to go into that particular barrel?
And on the backside, just like going off that, I mean, we're still learning a lot. And the funny thing is that you're tasting whiskey that he made his senior year of high school, and I was making my sophomore year of college. We got a lot to learn, even though we started when we were really young. Man, I just turned 25. He just turned 23 last week.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes down to it, the cool thing is that we were influenced too with the whiskey industry when we were very young, right? I mean, I remember getting Purple Tops and Willets whenever it was at their retail store where they had that little chalkboard out front. Sure. I remember Dad taking us down to Smooth Amber. I mean, I have the first ever Bowman single barrel ever put out. And then, I mean, Dad collected Russell's picks. And when it came down to it, our whiskey palate, just as a young kid, we came up. Hopefully we turned out all right. I mean, there's a lot of people who would say otherwise, but as a whole, I mean, we love what we do, and the passion and kind of the data drives us. We're really geeky, but the one good thing to remember before you taste all these, I mean, we take what Mother Nature gives us. We truly believe in the philosophy of terroir, terroir-driven whiskeys. And for us, vintage to vintage will have some changes. And people ask, like Starlight, why we focus on our single barrels is that individuality of cask to cask, run to run, really gives us that opportunity to, beat the big boys on the individuality of it. We can rotate a lot of different barrels from different cooperages at different proofs and different parts of our rick house and our farm. I mean, I can go back and tell you exactly which plot of corn it came from. I mean, we're data people. I mean,
and how many different whiskeys and cooperages we use as well is, in the end, consumers, every single consumer out in the market has a different palate. Yeah. Regardless if you like the same thing as another person, you're going to perceive each and every bottle in a different way as the person next to you. And with us, with such a wide array of what we do and what we can offer, it really offers the most opportunity for a client or whoever comes in to find a barrel that they truthfully love themselves, and not something that kind of just fits the mold or something that's kind of predetermined that this is good and you're kind of forced to take this. We want to work with everybody to find truthfully a barrel that they can honestly offer to any of their groups, any of their people, and for us too as well, because in the end, we have to go through and judge each and every one of these barrels and non-biasedly say, is this something of quality? Is this aromatically exceptional? Is this have the exceptional mouthfeel? Does it have a appropriate finish to it? And how do all these things tie together to make something that's truthfully special? So,
well, and at the end too, this is not a shot at any other distillery, but when you're here at Starlight, we're not just tasting 4 casks and saying this is the one, and we roll the one you pick. Say you pick barrel 3, we roll barrel 3 out, we put one more in, and the next group comes in after you and hope that one's good. I mean, Nick, you can speak onto that. You've been here, done the portfolio. But when it comes down to it, we really take the individuality, figuring out what you like and what you want to be proud to stand behind. So we taste all the 3 different distillers, Jesse, Jason, myself, my brother, my dad. We're all working. We're tasting with you, teaching you why we made the choices we did. And then we listen to what you like and where you want to go. And then we find barrels that you are truly proud about. I mean, there's some groups, I mean, we'll taste 11, 18 barrels, wherever. Just make sure you have a dropper when you leave, kind of deal. Nick, you can speak on that.
Yeah, no, I think we went through 20 barrels last time I was with you guys. I love listening to you guys. I really, really do. Every time I listen to you, I learn more about it. I love that you guys are formerly wine guys, because that's my background as well. Their facility is pretty awesome. And they have a lot going on. There's people everywhere, visitors. It's enormous, but you feel like you're just part of their family whenever you go through. I mean, I was in a rick house, they handed over the whiskey beak, and I'm climbing barrels, peeking barrels, just trying new things. And that's how I found my first barrel with them. I found something that I thought was the most amazing thing ever. It was probably one of my favorite picks of all last year. I just think they're doing some really fun stuff there. I really do believe that. And I have this notion of terroir as well. I mean, just being at your place makes me want to think that, that particular vintage, that particular year's grains really, made a difference in terms of what whiskey came out. And now I want to be there when next time I pick something. I kind of want to be a part of the dump and all this, and have some influence on it, or start right from the beginning and cuts and stuff. That sounds awesome.
Oh yeah.
That's pretty cool. Well, it sounds like we might have to get a trip in the books. But I was
Yeah.
going to ask you before we get going, what are you tasting tonight, Nick? What do you got in your glass?
Oh, well, I have my most recent pick from Starlight. I don't know if you guys can see that. There you go.
Oh yeah, nice and close.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, this thing's and we're talking caramels and strawberry and fruit cream, and just the texture on this is amazing. Makes me happy.
I like it. Wow.
That was a Canton barrel. I remember that. That's that really fruity one we picked a few months back. That was a really good shot.
Well, I got to say, it's good to hear from you guys. It's also great. It's also always awesome to see more under 30 people in whiskey, because I'm under 30 myself, and they're less rare than I find, but like it's always nice to, oh hey, like you're also under 30, because there's a lot of Nick. You look 28 too. I gotta.
I was hoping you were just gonna leave right by that, but thank you.
I was like, oh shoot, probably shouldn't leave him out. But no, it's always good to see young people doing great things. So on that note, I have not number 2. I have Char 2 poured here. I was sipping it while you guys were chatting. Very late, like very fruity, kind of perfumey, almost like a lavender quality to it, which I thought was interesting. The youth is pretty forward, which kind of surprised me for 5 years, but I think that comes from that lighter profile. Definitely, there was none of that like that strange like malt cardboard kind of wet grain, which was kind of nice to see. Now I think, let's see, all of these are at 55%. Is that what you proof all your samples to? Are you releasing barrels at barrel proof, or?
Everything is at barrel proof, unfined, unfiltered. 110 is a lot of, when we do samples, is kind of our placeholder. So it does get whatever it is. And I can actually run the quote unquote, whatever proof it will come out for you. We are always unfined, unfiltered, no matter what. Just truly where we like to drink our whiskeys and where we like to show. So when I put 110, it means it was between 110 and 115 as the proof. And then if I put 115 on the label, it's between 115 and 120, but it's between those gaps.
I was just curious because I 3 at 110, I was like, that's a little too similar to be right on the nose. But I just picked up number 2, and it is amazing how different this is. Like pancake syrup, like waffle, kind of like a nice waffle cone, like caramel, like almost a praline. It's amazing how quickly the fruits dropped off between the Char 2 and the Char 3. A little bit richer mouthfeel on 3, which is nice. I think 3 handles the proof a little bit better, which is probably more char interaction. It's interesting. I like this. It's amazing too. Like 5 years is plenty. You know, a lot of people will turn up their nose at. I did Driftless Glen. Your operation reminds me a lot of kind of the crazy stuff that they're doing up there. In, you know, most of the stuff I tasted, I was doing like 22 barrels that day. You know, and just kind of looked like. But you know, I don't think I tasted anything over 4.5, and was also like, you know, people, it doesn't need to be 10 years to be good.
Agreed.
Yeah, this has a lot going on to it. So I think I like the Char 3 over the 2 to start. That's good stuff. And all 3, just for note taking and people at home, all 3 are the 4-grain mash. Do you know, are all 4 of the, or all 3 of these the exact same mash, or they likely?
So they're all 3. So the reason I did this corporate, they're all same, like all same cooperage, different chars, all same mash. So 51, 20, 29.
Okay. Interesting.
Which
picked up 4 here. Yeah. 4 is much, I wouldn't say oilier, but much more cake and dessert. And you mentioned you got your preferred profile is definitely on the dessertier side of things. Okay. That's pretty apparent.
Yeah. We're, as I'm figuring out from our retailers and stuff, we were described as a desserty bourbon. Okay.
A lot. I mean, so I don't know if you're familiar with Reddit at all, but I moderate the subreddit for our bourbon, and we get a non-zero amount of posts every day. They're just like, tell me, like, I need a desserty bourbon. Like, people are super into it. So that doesn't surprise me that you guys are finding success, because a lot of people are super into that profile.
Yeah. I mean, it comes from clean cuts, big head cuts, small heart cuts, proofing properly, but it's all about, for us, it's those toasted, then charred barrels. You pour more lignin, which is your vanilla, and also frou-frou, which is your, you know, caramel, your butterscotch, your, you know, in lack of better terms, desserty style bourbon.
Okay. Yeah, it's apparent here too. So the final sample 4 is like, yeah, it's pure dessert. It's like fudgy, cocoa.
Mhm.
It has like this really big brown sugar, brown butter kind of toffee note that I get in a lot of like Guyana style rums, or maybe a Barbados style rum. That's like really decadent is probably the word I would use. Oh, that's good.
I will say too, not a shameless plug, but we just picked up, like I was saying earlier, those 22-year-old Guadalupe barrels we just filled back up with rye, and then I have that 8-year-old Foursquare. We're filling back up as well. Our finishing program, that's a whole other day I can talk about, but it's great.
Yeah. I mean, it's cool to see. Like, I talk a lot to the folks over at Barrel Craft Spirits, and it's always interesting when, they're like, oh, we have Amaro barrels rolling in, and I'm like, good Lord, like that is unusual, and it's cool to see like there's not a ton of Guadalupe rum like rolling around. So especially hyper aged gas like that are really neat.
Well, for us, all of our finishing, I mean, we're wine guys at heart. My brother, like I said, Alpha V&E, he went out to California, worked at Domaine Chandon, and then he went under Christian Moex at Dominus. Me, I went to Southern Italy. I worked for the Cantina Palio family. And then from there, I went to Domaine Chandon, and then the Cake Bread family. And then I went to Joseph Phelps. So our wine cast finish game is we're very picky. My importer says I'm harder to work with than Heaven Hill, Pernod Ricard, and Brown Forman put together. I'm just picky. I want the best of the best. I want quality barrels, and I want them, right as they're dumped. And like I mentioned, we fly them over. I mean, we'll go the extra leg so we can get fresh barrels to equal, as wet of a barrel as possible. So the quality's there. I just filled up 8 more casks of the VDN, Vino de Naraja, from Spain. I have 8 casks of Tokai Essencia on the way. I have more Sauternes coming in, both from Barsac and actual Sauternes from Bordeaux. Just, on and in, proud about. And I mean, it comes down. I mean, but I've denied good barrels too. A lot of Burgundy barrels, I've not found a Pinot Noir because they just don't get over here quick, or they have like Brettanomyces, disulfides, there's sulfur. There's a lot of stuff that can go wrong with finishing. But for us, being wine guys, we're able to sort through that. And I always tell my importers, like, don't feel bad if I say no. It's nothing against that. Last time, a very large distillery picked them up, and that's all right. But for us, it's 10 barrels is a lot when you're only pulling out 28 barrels a week.
Okay,
so,
it's gotta be good. I like it. Cool. So, kind of narrowing these down, I think. I thought the char 2 was interesting. I don't think that's totally the profile I'm rolling for. So I think it's between the char 3 and the char 4 here. Really nice on both. Really nice quality to it. Probably leaning a little bit on the 4. Like that has just a huge, like, lovely mouthfeel to it. That is really, I mean, if I didn't know the age, I would probably expect this to be in like the 7 to 8 year range, which is how like big and boisterous, and like the viscosity is right on, which is nice. The proof feels pretty good. Some young stuff drinks a little bit hot, but drinking really nicely. It's interesting because I kind of expected that I'd want the older, like, that extra 6 months on the 5 year, but the 4.5, I think it's drinking better with the heavier char. This is interesting stuff.
And it could be, I'll have to, like I said, I'll have to go out there and actually physically look at the barrel cast, but it was almost 5 years.
Okay.
They were all what we call our winter whiskey, January to May. So it probably is right around knocking around 5 years now. But I mean, age is always, I always lead with this. Age is always not a precursor of, quality. I've always preached that. Always told people we're not Scotland. I mean, we're not cool. We're not malted barley with a lot of extra oils. For me too, just knowing how wood works. I mean, it's we're using new American oak that's kiln drying historically in the bourbon industry. You know how much tannin leaches wood. And I always tell people, Jimmy Russell's quote where, why he chose his 10 years for Russell Reserve. He said 8 to 12 is the peak to pull it. And I said, if you want to talk to anybody, talk to Eddie. Even though Master Keep, of course, comes out with 17, yada, yada, yada. But it really comes down to, the seasons where it is, your mash bill, and the forest you're pulling wood from. I mean, as America, we don't talk with just American oak, but, French, you have Limousine, Allier, different forest. I mean, we do have forest designation here, but no one really pays attention. Ozarks versus West Virginia, to speak of one. Plus Louisville, I mean, going right down there to Lebanon and around there. I mean, there's Kentucky oak as well, but they're all different. I mean, depending on the humidity, the cold, the growing degree days, or growth of the rings, tight grain select barrels versus, wider grains, warmer climate barrels. All that plays a huge factor in the overall aging of barrels. For me in particular, like I said, when I go older whiskey in general, it's you really got to start asking those questions. Where's it been aged at? Who's doing it? Who's mash bill? Of course, wheat ages out longer than anything. Buffalo Trace, of course, shows that with their antique collection. But sometimes you really need to look at these high rise. Rise does really well at age as well. And again, looking at how they're keeping their oak, their rick housing systems, if they're, Four Roses versus, I mean, if it goes down to Buffalo Trace's ricking system, all that plays a huge factor on how much that osmotic pressure is building up in those barrels, leaching that tannin out. And I mean, it's crazy. I can, again, talk forever about that kind of stuff.
No, I love it. And so you guys are using traditional ricking, right? Or you're not palletizing?
No, so we're actually using stainless steel racks. We follow under, in truth, like we are the classic 5 to 6 high, just
okay.
Like Four Roses. But we're on metal racks, so 2 barrels per metal rack. We stack them up 6 high. Perfect airflow between each. The warehouses that we have, each one has about 2,500 barrels in them. We have 3 of them. In particular, they were designed out by Jim Beam Global. Whenever they got bought out by Suntory, we had, again, knowing people in the right place, right time. There was really upset engineers that corrected our initial drawings to help us, better our whiskey. And the cool thing was they were looking at the buy craft distilleries just like, Pernod Ricard or Constellation was.
Yeah.
And then when, like I said, when they sold out, that was liquidated. I mean, Suntory bought them for Beam. But in the backside, we have 9 foot of bigger gravel, bigger rocks, smaller rocks, then 2 foot of concrete reinforced that holds that when the rocks get cold during the winter, in May, it could be 80 degrees, 90 degrees out here, but you sit on that floor, it's bone cold. Okay. Same thing happens in, November. That floor is hot for so many months. You feel it. You can feel the radiation coming off. As well as our, like I said, how we have it vented or how we can hold the heat in there to build up that osmotic pressure, really forcing our whiskey in, and then also having that vacuum coming out. Again, and using toasted barrels, we're really pulling out that vanilla, that lignin, that caramel, butterscotch, toffee because of that. That's why we're hugely for long toast flash charred barrels rather than kennel drying charred barrels. Everything, like I said, we like to use is air dried wood, 2 to 4 years, and then toasting those barrels and lightly charring them, then lightly charring them or heavy toasting them, and then flash char them up and be done with it.
Cool. I love it. It's great to get all this information. It's, sometimes you just get a little kit in the mail and a little post-it note. But this is great. I think tasting through, I went through all 3 of them again while you were chatting. I think that the char number 4 is the winner for me. This I'll get some official notes for the email list for the million of you guys hanging out. But yeah, it has this really nice cake batter, like waffle cone note to it that works really well. It reminds me of like I'm not a big ice cream guy. I worked in an ice cream shop for one summer and I like ruined my love of ice cream. But like every now and then, like once a summer, I'll have, it's like cookie dough ice cream and like a waffle cone. And it's just like really desserty, really rich, like has a nice reminiscent of that, which is fun and delicious. So that's a nice barrel. And it, whatever age it comes out to, I think it's drinking really nicely for that age. So good stuff. You've effectively helped me repress the memory of my very first 2-year Starlight, which was not like terrible, but I did not expect that in a couple of years I'd be back and taking a whole barrel because it's a market improvement.
Well, we talk about how crazy it was for us. I mean, in 19, we thought we were doing well. We sold 32 barrels of at like single barrels at 4 years old. And we thought we were the next big thing. So we went from 32 to 2020, where we did 214 single barrels rolled out of here at 4 to 5 years.
Wow.
And we were really proud. I mean, the community, the whiskey community is really, I mean, it's honestly, it can bring us to tears kind of deal of how much people got involved with us and with Starlight. We're humbled. I mean, it's just, I mean, it's our family. And like I said, we love what we do. We're here every single day, making making every single cut, and, talking with you guys. I mean, we just love whiskey. I mean, that's why we got into it. But at the end of the day, it's crazy to see how far we've came from, that 2 year, humble beginning that was too bitter. Again, using air dried wood with toasted brought out bitter green notes, but how long and how far we came, and just believing in the concept that originally, like I said, Dave and Lisa and everyone knew it was going to be, but we just kind of had to wait. I mean, there's one thing you can never cheat in life, especially with whiskey. That is time. I don't know, whoever or whatever, you can use small barrels, you can use whatever you want. There's one thing you cannot cheat, is Mother Nature in that time. So it's cool to see how far we came. And like I said, if we're going to hit our goal by the 2030s, selling 8 to 12 year picks, I mean, we're putting back more and more whiskey. We just bought 4 new fermenters, and we're going to start working with Vendome designing our next still. But the key for us is that we never wanted to be a grocery store box brand. We never wanted to be everywhere. We just want to make geeky whiskey that we love. That's why we don't make cohesive whiskey. We want to have fun, and we want to enjoy what we do. We want to go out to the Rick House every Saturday. Like the biggest father-son experiment you can go in. I mean, I hate to say it, it's like that old world European, father-son vineyard. Same thing with our distillery. I mean, we love it. I want to give my kids the opportunity to carry on to the 8th generation and continue what Starlight is, which is, family-owned, sustainably farmed for 178 years, and be proud of what you make, and continue to make great whiskey and continue to geek out with you guys like you all the time. Because once you lose the passion, then the quality goes, and that's where we want to stay.
Yeah, and as someone who's a fan of like heritage agave spirits and like heritage like Armagnac and Cognac that follow those very similar trajectories and timelines, it's cool to see that being born into the whiskey industry as well. Especially when a lot of distilleries are gigantic and huge, and they make great whiskey too, but it's very much an operation or factory, and it's cool to see differing different approaches, and clearly it works because this barrel is awesome. I love it.
Thank you.
Well, cool. I think we're kind of rolling up here towards the top of the hour. Nick and I will chat after this. We'll get things buttoned up. Did you have anything to add, Nick? I know you've been a pretty good guest and enjoying your Starlight there as well. But
thank you. Yeah, no, I definitely am. I love listening here, and it's fantastic. I mean, the next time that I head down, I think I'm bringing my son with me, so I can start him down this the same road. He's not quite 13, but he's he's 19, so we can get him started right now. I think picking barrels and so forth. So I'm excited to get down there again.
Oh, that's cool.
Everything you guys are doing, I really do. And if 7, 8, 12-year-old barrels, I mean, count me in. I love them at 4, for crying out loud. So
yeah. Not bad, but again, thank you guys again for everything. And like I said, we're always here. Next time you're in the area, either, like I said, I'm here. Nick, you got my phone number. You can always give me a call. Again, I'm a huge whiskey geek at heart, and next time you're here, I'd like to show you a bunch of our cool experiments that we have coming up, from Tokai rye to apple brandy to Armagnac finished, and just stuff like that. Flavor profile, if you're a fan of finished whiskeys, we do a very subtle, nuanced version of that. We believe the spirit needs to talk first before the other one, but, Weird and Wild, weed and mash bills and stuff like that, one-off projects. So if you're in Louisville, please reach out. We're 20 minutes from downtown. Literally park your car. It only takes 20 minutes to get up here.
That's great. That's a great note to end off. Nick and I, to everyone at home, we have a little travel on the books for later this year. So maybe we'll talk on stopping by and giving you a ring. But thank you guys so much. Christian, has been an absolute pleasure. You're a bastion of information and learning, which was super cool. I don't always, surprisingly, like a lot of people are very passionate about whiskey, but sometimes I hop into the distillery and they're like, there's the barrels, and then, that's the end. So it's very cool to dig below the surface. and get all of that extra info. I'm pumped about this barrel. I think it's great. Everybody at home, an email will go out end of this week as usual. I'll put out the tasting notes. We'll talk about timeline and stuff like that. And Nick, thank you again for joining me as well. It's great to see not only a fan of mellow corn, but a fan of good whiskey. And it's great to get to work with our retail partners and get to chat and kind of let everybody talk. And it's great to meet them and see face to face, especially in COVID. So this has been a pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Let's see. I'm not usually the button pusher. John's not here because he has a life, but we'll go ahead and close this out. And thanks for joining me. I hope you guys stay healthy. Christian, great work. Nick, always good to talk. And we'll go and catch up. See y'all.
Yeah.
All the best.